It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. We are live in the green space today, and now we get to do something really fun in a geeky sort of way, but also really important. We're going to have an old-fashioned Oxford-style debate with the help of the group that does this all the time, Intelligence Squared-U.S, or IQ2-US. The question in this debate is likely the most important thing New Yorkers will be deciding on Election Day, and chances are most of you New Yorkers listening right now don't even know about it. It's a question on the ballot in all of New York State that invites you to vote for or against a New York State constitutional convention. Now, before we meet our debaters, just a little bit of background. You know that the United States government has a constitution, right? Well, state governments have constitutions too. The New York State Constitution has all kinds of things in it. One of those things is that it requires this vote every 20 years. That is, it gives voters a chance to reopen the Constitution itself with a majority yes vote on Election Day. I'll mostly let the debaters frame the issues, but I will say this, which will be relevant, I think, in mostly progressive downstate New York, where most of our listeners are. Progressives are divided on whether to have a constitutional convention. Some see the opportunity to expand constitutional rights in the state for women and people of color, for poor people, for marijuana smokers, and for the people generally against corruption. Others are afraid that conservatives will dominate the constitutional protections, dominate the convention, I should say, and the constitutional protections considered progressive will be weakened or in some cases taken away. Pension rights, gun safety laws, environmental protections, and more. And so we've set up our panel largely to debate whether a New York State constitutional convention will be good or bad for progressive policies and values. Our official debate question is simple and straightforward. Yes or no to this statement. Vote yes to call a New York State constitutional convention. Yes or no to voting yes. And I'm standing right now between two teams of two, for those of you who can't see us. And by the way, if you're listening and you would like to see us, when we're in the green space like this, we live video stream the show. So if you want to go to thegreenspace.org, that's green with an E at the end, thegreenspace.org, you can find the live video stream. And I'll wave hello to everybody out there in video land, as well as people who are listening on the radio. So the rest of you cannot see that I'm standing between two teams of two, experts in the topic who will argue for and against the motion, vote yes to call the New York State Constitutional Convention. This Oxford-style debate will go in 3 rounds, and then you, our audience, listening, watching on the live video stream and here live in the green space, will choose the winner. And listeners, here's how it works for you. We will invite you to cast a vote right now to state your starting point before the debate. Then you can cast a second vote after the debate. That way we'll see which team of debaters changed more minds, and it might be an indication of who's got the more work to do between now and Election Day. So let's get to the first round of voting. To cast your pre-debate vote, type the website address iq2us.org/vote into any web browser. You will get a list of options for the motion, against the motion, and undecided. Undecided is also an option at iq2us.org/vote. IQ for Intelligence Squared, our debating partners. The number 2, US as in United States, .org/vote. iq2us.org/vote. iq2us.org/vote. And you will get a list of options for the motion, against the motion, and undecided on the motion for whether to have a New York State Constitutional Convention. Vote right now. It's non-binding, obviously. In fact, that's the whole point. You just register how you think you feel about this right at this moment, and at the end of the debate, you get to vote again. So cast your pre-debate vote, yes or no, to a New York State Constitutional Convention at iq2us.org/vote, iq2us.org/vote. Our motion, vote yes to call the New York State Constitutional Convention. Let's meet the debaters. First, the team arguing for the motion, Gerald Benjamin, Distinguished Professor at SUNY New Paltz, and co-editor of the book, New York's Broken Constitution, The Governance Crisis and the Path to Renewed Greatness, and New York State Senator Liz Krueger, Democrat from the east side of Manhattan. And the team arguing against the Constitutional Convention, Adriene Holder, attorney in charge of the civil practice of the Legal Aid Society, and Henry Garrido, who is the executive director of DC Council 37. That's the big municipal employees union. Listeners and people in the green space audience, please welcome our debaters. All right. Thank you very much. And on to round one, opening statements from each of our debaters. They will be 4 minutes each. And we start with Gerald Benjamin up first for the motion. Gerald Benjamin, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at SUNY New Paltz. Professor.
Good morning. I urge you to vote yes for a constitutional convention. Governance in New York State is in crisis. This crisis has many dimensions, some obvious, others less evident. Our peak political institutions are massively dysfunctional and out of balance with each other. The state legislature is dominated by leadership and fails to function as a deliberative body. It is riven with corruption, peopled by unaccountable members elected from gerrymandered districts, opaque in its operations, and often unable to decide key matters because of bicameral differences. Partly as a result of informal constitutional change through high court misinterpretation or pragmatic acceptance of the governor's budgetary powers and powers to define the legislative agenda through what's called messages of necessity, the executive power has grown beyond intention, beyond dimensions desirable for a democratic republic. Without constitutional grounding, our Attorney General seeks to be the state's chief prosecutor, responding to popular demand for cleaning up the system at any cost, even at the cost of the creation of a non-democratic praetorian government. Our elections are administered by constitutionally entrenched partisan process, disguised as bipartisan, an example of reform captured by machine politics. More than almost anywhere in the United States, people in New York don't vote, abetting developments that threaten to transform them from citizens to subjects of the regime. Justice delayed is justice denied. Ask any lawyer. Our judicial system, the subject of 30% or our 50,000-word Constitution, and entirely defined in it, is the least well-organized in the country and routinely delays justice, especially in civil matters. After a century-long struggle, we embraced the idea of home rule for localities in our Constitution, but have not in fact achieved it. This should be very evident to people in New York City. Again, with the support of the High Court, the state government regularly inserts itself into local matters. More generally, our lengthy Constitution is replete with dead-letter law. It needs a good scrubbing. All these problems, in whole or in part, require constitutional remedies. The convention is a once-in-a-generation opportunity given us in 1846 by Constitution writers to bypass entrenched power, return to democracy's sovereign people, you and me, the sovereign people, to make needed reforms that the legislature will not make. We must seize this opportunity. Look at this Constitution. I imagine not many people here have read it. It's the size of a paperback novel. One reason for its length, admittedly excessive, is that in several ways state constitutions have different functions than our national Constitution. One difference is they entrench positive rights, not restrictions, but requirements placed on government. Over decades, constitutions in New York have routinely directed government to do such things as provide education, establish your civil service system, protect our wilderness against depredation, assure worker rights to organize, and guarantee their pensions as contracts, and to respond to the needs of the poor. These are all good ideas. I embrace them. However, it is an ironic unintended consequence, and many of those who rightly value these provisions now want to deny the state the opportunity to address its governance crisis for fear that they will be compromised or lost. Often with partial truths or misrepresentations of the historic record, opponents attack constitutionally defined processes for calling and staffing a convention. These processes are far from perfect, but as my colleague will tell you, efforts to change them have failed because the legislature does not want a convention. It does not want to be bypassed. It does not want reform.
20 seconds.
Now, there are other matters that we'll get into in some detail, but the fundamental point is that There's no way to reform New York government, the fundamentals of New York government, without holding a constitutional convention. That's why I urge you to join me in voting yes for a convention in November.
Thank you, Professor Benjamin. Our next debater against the motion, vote yes to call a New York State Constitutional Convention, is Adriene Holder, attorney in charge of the civil practice of the Legal Aid Society.
Thank you. Good morning. I stand very proud with so many other progressive organizations who are asking you all to really look at the facts and to vote no against a constitutional convention. At the Legal Aid Society, we represent individuals and families in the community in over 300,000 matters a year. We do that with a high-volume direct legal services practice, as well as through class action and impact litigation. We engage in legislative and policy advocacy and community outreach and education, and I think that we're uniquely qualified to tell you that a constitutional convention really poses some serious and grave risks. Grave risks to low-income persons, people of color, LGBT New Yorkers, women, children, the elderly, and immigrants. All constituencies that are being targeted by Washington, D.C. right now. All constituencies, quite frankly, that many legislators here in the state have never prioritized. And so we have friends, and I really respect Liz Krueger. I've known her many, many years, Senator Krueger. I've known her many, many years. And I respect folks who are saying, some of our friends who are saying, this is the time, isn't it, Adriene, to go ahead and have a constitutional convention. Let's go ahead and push for real reforms. And I say, we are always about reforms. We're the Legal Aid Society. We're the oldest and largest private non-for-profit defender organization, civil legal services organization in the country. But this is not the way to do it. Good idea, wrong roadmap. What we're really talking about is that if we have a constitutional convention, everything is up for grabs. Everything. And quite specifically, and what we focus on, is a provision in the state constitution, Article 17, Section 1, that mandates that the state provide aid and care to the needy. And it's through this provision that we've been able to secure some tremendous rights for folks, protections, expansion and protections. And quite literally, what are those? Some of those have to do with the court having established that New York City will not abide by having homeless individuals and families sleep out on the street. There's a right to shelter in New York because we, the Legal Aid Society, brought that legislation and provided that advocacy. Every day, my lawyers who work in preventing evictions and homelessness, they're able to do that with programs and subsidies that were established in response to litigation that we brought because of Article 17. The state constitution provided that type of safety net and strengthened that safety net. And all across this country, there are states that time limit people's benefits. There are states that actually will deprive children of subsistence benefits. Needy children of subsistence benefits because it's thought that their parents have not complied with any work rules. And we can go to court if something is going on and they're denied those benefits. We would need an ironclad guarantee. We would have to know that through this process of electing 204 delegates, that we know that there are going to be folks who are going to protect these rights. We know since the 90s there's actually been legislation introduced to actually eliminate or weaken Article 17. And as lawyers, we're trained to look at the risk and look at the rewards. And I'm telling you, there's a lot at stake. And the competing interests and the fact that our clients' issues oftentimes are not the priority, we know that with horse trading, we have no reason to think that this would in any way favor our clients. The risk is too great.
20 seconds.
Meanwhile, there's an alternative. New Yorkers have amended the Constitution over 200 times by legislative amendment. Legislative amendment bears none of the same risks as a convention. Single changes are voted up and down, others are not at stake, and in fact there are two that are going to be on the ballot in November. For these reasons, the Legal Aid Society stands with the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and the NAACP, and unions, and so many other progressive organizations with a proven track record protecting and expanding the rights of individuals.
Thank you very much, Ms. Holder from the Legal Aid Society. Debating for the motion, vote yes to call a New York State Constitutional Convention, New York State Senator Liz Krueger, Democrat from the Upper East Side. Hi.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. And I just want to start by saying I respect all four of the debaters here today. And this is actually a debate within the progressive community, because I proudly define myself as a liberal Democrat, a progressive who wants to make the state better. And yet I have seen over the 15 years I have been in the legislature that the right answer, I believe, is a constitutional convention. I opposed the convention in '97 for some of the exact reasons that Adriene spoke of, because I was doing anti-poverty work then. But I've watched 20 years where we've actually gone backwards in protecting the needs of the lowest income New Yorkers. We've gone backwards in any number of issues that matter more than ever, because it is the 21st century. We can't depend on Washington. We have to figure out how to do the right things for ourselves in New York. But our constitutional structure is outdated, antiquated, and doesn't allow for true democracy. I trust the people of New York. They're going to get 3 bites at the apple to get this right, or stop it if it's wrong. The election right coming up in November, whether or not we vote yes or no on the ballot initiative, then a determination of delegates who will run in 2018, which is going to be a hot button year, I believe, for progressives to make their moves in politics, given all of the excitement around the need to make changes in our government and political process. And then finally, the voters again will get to decide whether or not they accept the final proposal of the delegates. And guess what? Every time we've had a convention in this state and it has actually passed the voters, it has been a movement forward in progressive agenda issues, not the taking away of rights. So I hear people talking about their fears that we could go backwards, but I would argue that the majority of New Yorkers would not let that happen. I hear from my friends in the environmental movement, we could lose forever wild protecting our parks. I point out in the 21st century, we can get an amendment to the Constitution within a constitutional convention to provide for clean air, clean water, which other states have through their process, but we do not have here. I hear Legal Aid Society's concern about we could lose that one sentence. I don't believe it. I actually think we could expand protections and discrimination against different peoples, which the existing Constitution continues to allow to take place. Get campaign finance reform and voter reform, which are the fundamental failures of the state legislature, because the truth is, those of us who are in office think it's working just fine for us, but it's not working fine for 20 million New Yorkers. So we can get the changes we need in the infrastructure of the government process in the 21st century that ensure we can move forward with more equitable and fair legislation moving through a legislature who would have to abide by the rules they have no intention of passing on themselves, but the people could pass on as requirements through a convention. So I urge everyone to seriously ask themselves, do they think the structure in Albany is working for them? Do we think that it is a fair and equitable system? We can't get criminal court reform. We can't get court reform. We can't get campaign finance reform, legislative reform. We do pretend ethics reforms, I think, every year, and then somebody else gets sentenced to jail and we go, oops, we got that wrong again.
15 seconds.
We have a real opportunity to function as democracy was designed to do. Open it up to the people, have the hard discussions, make the proposals, and then see whether the public votes up or down. There is plenty of opportunity for public process for this to go forward successfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Our final debater is against the motion. As if you're just joining us, we're going 2 and 2 in these 4-minute opening statements. Then we'll have a big discussion. We'll invite your phone calls, audience questions from here in the green space. So our final debater against the motion, vote yes on Election Day to call a New York State Constitutional Convention, is Henry Garrido. He's Executive Director of the largest New York City employees union, DC 37. Mr. Garrido.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. We are urging you to vote no on a constitutional convention. I think I have heard arguments from friends in the progressive movement about how this will become the mechanism to change what is broken in Albany. It has been painted as a panacea where everything that we seem to be against will be done through the Constitutional Convention. I simply believe, and the people I represent have shown me that there's just simply too much at stake. That we have provisions in the constitutions that would affect the environment in the forever wild provision, that there's merit and fitness requirements as protected in the Constitution with the civil service, that you are putting people's retirement security at risk by allowing the influence of Wall Street and other institutions who have been trying to get holds of public pensions for many, many years, that will have an opportunity to do that. There are provisions in the constitutions that are too costly, and I believe it's naive to think that we're going to be able to change what is broken in Albany to this process. And quite frankly, for those who have painted this as the People's Convention, the reality is the agenda for this convention would be set by the 204 delegates that would be elected to the 63 senatorial districts and the 15 delegates at large. And we have seen the influence of money in the elections throughout this nation, especially since Citizens United, where we have seen people like the Koch brothers buy elections processes. We believe that the average New Yorker, the school aide out in Queens, will not be able to run as a delegate. And in fact, it would be the influence of money that would be dominating the selection process of the delegates. There is simply too much at risk to allow for a process. In fact, it is our belief that you are be putting the same people that you have had concerns in Albany and concerns in the state of New York in charge of a process that would put together all that is precious to us. In the last Constitutional Convention that we saw in 1967, exactly that happened, where bundling was a process where good things were put with bad things together, and voters were asked to vote up and down whether they should approve the good things or the bad things. Look, are there things in the constitutions that we need to change? Yes. Are there things there that we could do better? Absolutely. But a constitutional convention is not a way to do it. In fact, I think Adriene mentioned the fact that the Constitution has been changed over 200 times through a process that already exists. And we believe if people feel strongly enough that they need to change some of the things that should be done, not through the Constitutional Convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes round one of this debate in partnership with Intelligence Squared-U.S. Please thank all four of our debaters for making their initial presentations. And people here in the Green Space audience and anybody listening or watching out there in radio and live video streaming land, keep in mind how you voted at the start of this debate. Those of you who voted, you will be voting again at the conclusion in about a half hour. It's the difference between the first vote and the second vote that determines our winner and might make a little news here today. We will have round two, a panel discussion among the four debaters, where I will follow up on some of the things that they all raised, and you can too, coming up after a break. Call in, listeners, with a question for any of the four debaters on what you heard about reasons to vote for or against a New York State Constitutional Convention. 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692. All of that right after this.
The hidden costs of the emergency room.
They're secret. You're not going to see these posted on the emergency room door. You're just going to find out what your hospital's facility fee is for the emergency room when you get the bill and when you're expected to pay it.
When a quick trip to the ER runs you a steep bill, including the story of the $629 Band-Aid. That's next time on The Takeaway, weekday afternoons at 3 on 93.9 FM.
WNYC supporters include the Guggenheim Museum, presenting Art in China After 1989, Theater of the World, a survey of contemporary art from China featuring works by 71 artists. More information and tickets at guggenheim.org/artinchina. The Jerome L. Green Foundation, helping to keep the arts affordable and accessible for audiences across New York City. On the next On Being,
I think what we're seeing actually is not compassion fatigue, but empathic distress.
Zen abbot and anthropologist Joan Halifax on finding buoyancy rather than burnout in our lives and in the world. I'm Krista Tippett. Please join us. Tonight at 9 on 93.9 FM WNYC.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space today. And if you're just joining us, we're in the middle of a real old-fashioned Oxford-style debate on a really important ballot question that New York State voters will decide upon on Election Day. Should there be a New York State Constitutional Convention? Voters decide this every 20 years, only every 20 years. And we're asking, would opening up the state constitution be more of an opportunity for progressives or conservatives to have their way with the New York State Constitution? We have two teams of people on each side debating the formal motion, which is vote yes to call a New York State Constitutional Convention, and the kind of more informal subtext here, is this going to be good or bad for progressives and progressive values and the people with interests who are represented by progressive values, because that's really where the debate seems to be falling in New York State. This is very largely progressive on progressive here with different camps. And on the side for the motion, we have Gerald Benjamin and Liz Krueger. On the side against the motion, Adriene Holder and Henry Garrido. Mr. Garrido is executive director of the Municipal Employees Union, DC 37. Ms. Holder, also against the motion, is with the Legal Aid Society. Gerald Benjamin is a professor at New Paltz who wrote a book on the messed up New York State Constitution, and Progressive Democrat Liz Krueger from the east side of Manhattan is our other for the motion side. So again, now we do a panel discussion, and you can each designate on your teams who's going to speak. What I want to throw out first as a follow-up is a pure politics question, because it sounds like you agree on the values. You want protection for the poor, for women, for LGBTQ folks, for people of color, for the environment, etc. So, Liz Krueger, I guess we could start with you. Why think that the energized, Trumpy, conservative nationalists aren't going to hijack this convention and give us some right-wing changes rather than progressive changes?
So the energized Trumpy nationalists, the good news is they don't really represent a large block in any given Senate district in the state. So it is true there will be 204 delegates. Other than 15 of them, they will be voted 3 per Senate district.
So now we're getting into another important aspect.
Right.
How do we choose the delegates to a constitutional convention if one is approved? So repeat that formula.
Okay, so there'll be 204 delegates, 15 of which are voted at large statewide. The others are elected 3 per Senate district. There are only 31 Republican senators in the entire state. So hypothetically,
there are only 32 Democratic senators in the entire state, right?
Correct. But Democrats outnumber Republicans in registration 2-1. So the truth is, when you look at delegates running per district, there's far more of a chance of Democrats winning the delegate slots than Republicans. And while, yes, it's true, a legislator could run for delegate at the same time as they were running for re-election in 2018, personally, I think most of us would have a hard time explaining to the voters why we want them to vote for us for 2 different jobs where we're going to get paid our salary twice, so that we can be a delegate in a legislator. I think most legislators won't go near trying to be delegates this time
this
around.
is optimism versus pessimism, right?
Well, I thank the senator for proving my point. The reality is that it doesn't matter how many registered voters you have, either Democrat or Republican. The reality is the majority of the people who get elected get reelected over and over again because of voter apathy, because of low turnout, because they already have an inside track on the registered voters in that particular district. What we have seen and we're afraid of is not only existing senators, with all respect, Senator, to run, but also running slates so that they could also carry in some of their own groups in their district, and they can, in fact, manipulate the process. Electing the delegates is a real issue and a real concern because they could open any portion of the Constitution, not just what we want to see, but what the delegates have to see. And until we have a process that's fair, that allows for everyday New Yorkers to run, I don't think that would be a good process to follow.
And if I could just add, in addition, when you're thinking about these Senate districts, these are districts that we all agree that more so than the assembly districts, they actually have been gerrymandered. And so the idea that we're actually going to open it up and it's going to be this event where we're going to really have a very open and we're going to be able to encourage a lot of different folks to participate in the process, that premise is just wrong. 20 years ago, we should have really been trying to change the delegate rules, and we should have been doing some things around voter reforms with voting here in the state. I sat on a committee at the state bar where we came up with wonderful suggestions about how to reform and to really open it up for the state so that we don't have to continue to be number 46 in terms of voter participation. And again, there's a whole process that we can go through. But even that, there's a level of confusion and apathy about how it is that we're going to get voters, and some of that has to happen. It's putting the cart before the horse to think that all of a sudden we're going to have.
I think it's the opposite because you left that to the legislature, it didn't happen, and it's not going to happen unless you have a constitutional
Let me stay on the,
convention.
Professor Benjamin,
Yes.
let me stay on this question of the delegates for one more second, because if there are 63 state Senate districts, and it's going to be 3 per state Senate districts elected by the people in each district, then we're talking about a coin toss, whether the liberals or conservatives come out in control of the convention, aren't we?
That's not true. That's not true. Let's correct the record a little bit. First of all, Liz Krueger and others put process changes in, and they weren't passed. I call this the catch-22. The legislature won't pass the process changes because it doesn't want a convention. Then after it fails to do that, it argues to you, oh, look how awful the process is, don't do this. In fact, we have to authorize a convention so that process changes occur. The way that will happen is, and I know this because I debated the head of the New York Civil Liberties Union, they'll immediately bring a lawsuit, and the lawsuit will drive process changes. So that's the question of process change. The question of the districts is interesting. It's a Republican gerrymander for the Senate, and I might add a massive Democrat gerrymander for the Assembly. The Assembly is not virtuous when it comes to gerrymandering. So now we have a Republican gerrymander that's produced a Democrat majority in the Senate. And the reason is that the Republicans can't gerrymander themselves into control because there aren't enough Republicans in New York. And if you look at the way they did it, they cut very close margins in certain districts and relied on incumbency and packed the Democrats in other districts. But we're electing 3 in each of these districts. They will not be able to elect 3. Democrats will be elected in some of those districts by divided outcomes, as occurred in 1967. So any serious an analyst of this, and there have been several, I've done some of this and others have, say there'll be at least 110, and perhaps as many as 125 Democrats at the convention. I gain no comfort from this as an upstater, but that happens to be the fact. So to argue that the outcome is going to be conservative, why most thoughtful conservatives in New York, and again, I am not proud of this, have condemned the prospect of a convention because they think that precisely the opposite will happen. Liberal Democrats will run the convention.
Let me tell our callers that we'll go to phone calls in just a minute, and people here in the green space, raise your hand, and Zoe, who is somewhere I can't see, will come around with a microphone and we'll take your questions from here. Let me follow up with you, Mr. Garrido, on one thing. We're talking about whether progressive values or conservative values might rule the day at a state constitutional convention. Unions are generally seen as on the progressive side. But in this context, are the municipal union like yours and the other public employees unions who are working very hard to defeat a constitutional convention, from what I've read, more money is coming from the teachers union than from any other single source on either side, and the unions are really fighting this. Why should we not see you as a special interest rather than a progressive in this case, trying to keep it as hard as it is today for the public to make changes to the pension system if they think the state can't afford it.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I've said that I make no apologies for fighting for and protecting working people. There's a lot of pieces in this Constitution that will affect not just union people, but working people in general. There are workers' compensation laws, worker protections, there's collective bargaining laws that affect not just represented by a union in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. And as far as the issue of pension, yes, we are concerned about changes in the Constitution that would diminish the retirement security of literally millions of people here in New York, not just those who are in the union. People talk about...
It's only public employee unions who can be directly affected by changes to the state constitution in this respect, right?
Well, no, that's actually not true. In terms of pensions, there is, but there's also prevailing wage laws. And those are wages that are protected. That affects both public and private employees in the Constitution. And there's a real serious fear among both public and private sector unions that if they change the way the public sector pensions are done in terms of defined benefit contributions, that it will affect the private sector as well. So yes, there are many protections in the Constitutions that help working people, including many of those who don't work anymore, who are retirees, whose average pension, by the way, is $18,000 a year in New York. And we're very concerned about changing the constitutions and taking away those protections.
Let's go to a phone caller. Kelly in Bedford-Stuyvesant, you're on WNYC. Hi, Kelly.
Hi there. My question is for hopefully both sides of the panel, and it's regarding the voter laws that we have here in New York, which are among the most draconian and unprogressive in the entire country. And my question is, if we don't change some of these backwards voter laws in the Constitutional Convention, what is the reality that they will ever be changed by a normal legislative process? Because I personally don't have confidence that they will ever change if we go through the normal channels.
That sounds like a challenge to the con side, primarily. So, Ms. Holder, you want to take that?
I mean, I think that, again, when we talk about all of the energy that we've been expending, I think, in the last many, many months, to actually talk about all of the changes that need to happen, I think it's a very good question that you raise, and I think we're all very concerned with what we need to have in terms of real reforms, especially when it comes to voting. And I think what we should do is we should band together, that we need to talk about what those reforms can be, and we need to push those through. But again, the idea that we would open up the entire Constitution in order to deal with these types of issues, I think it just is, it poses some really grave and serious risks to so many other protections that Henry and I are talking about. And so, yes, we need to reform the laws. I think a lot of states have reformed a lot of their laws. I think the energy, and I like the energy. I love the fact that this is a progressive debate. I like the fact that there are people who are really interested in talking about these issues, and we live in a great state. We live in an exceptional state, and we right now are in a great city where we could get those things done, but we have to be very real, and we need to prioritize what it is that we're talking about. And the things that I have raised, I think, are the types of things that with horse trading, they are not going to be the priority. They're going to fall off the table. But yes, we do need much needed reforms.
Let me suggest a quotation from Albert Einstein. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We've been pressing in the legislature for these reforms for literally decades. The Constitution directs that elections will be administered by boards of elections. We know that that's a waste of money. We know that they run elections unfairly. We know that we should have neutral election administration. Additionally, the Constitution has certain rules about registration in anticipation of the election. We know that those rules need to be changed to elevate participation. That is not happening. When the federal government funded reform in elections following the contested presidential election of year 2000, if I have my memory correct, New York State ran a special report on how it would reform its election as required by the feds. They did not attempt to address this process. And the reason they didn't is because it's entrenched and in the interest of incumbents to sustain this process. We need a constitutional convention to address the fundamental governance issues. We have massive experience that they're not addressed in the normal process of governance. We need to create a new institution with new players, no incumbents in those positions. They exist for only one purpose: to give consideration to the fundamentals of our governance. They respond to the sovereign people who select them for a special purpose. We need this opportunity.
We have a question here, excuse me, in the green space, and we thank Brian Lehrer Show producers Amina Cerna and Zoe Agile for running with the mics during the green space program this morning. Hi there.
Hi. This feels like a risky question to ask, but I'm noticing that the teams are balanced in terms of gender, but the pro side are white and the no side are people of color, and I wonder if that means anything, and is that just a coincidence, or does that mean something in terms of what's going on in the debate?
I have no idea. Mr. Garrido, what do you think?
No, I do think it's a coincidence. This hasn't been broken around the issue of race, but more of progressive values. Now, I do think that what was raised about this concept of the definition of insanity, it's true. Allowing this constitutional convention, it is exactly that. It's an insanity. You're putting the very incumbents that are running government right now and giving them the opportunity to run again as delegates, run their people as delegates, get a second salary while serving in the legislature. And then you think they're going to go on there and change the process for election? That is insane, right? That is insane. Now, to me, the Constitution already has protections against gerrymandering. Guess what? It happens. It happens because those who are in charge in Albany are allowing it to happen. And we're going to put them again in charge of our Constitution? Right. I think that's incredible.
Let me take the audience member's question a step further and ask, I'm just curious, if there is socioeconomic diversity on both sides of this, can you display it through your endorsements, through what groups are lining up for this? Because maybe what the audience member had in mind is this sort of white, middle class, abstract, good government theory types trying to push this, and a lot of women and minorities and sexual minorities afraid, because New York does have a pretty good constitution in many respects that serve them, that there's more risk than opportunity here. Who can you represent on the pro side socioeconomic diversity in your coalition?
I absolutely think so. I think it, with all due respect, is overly simplistic. There happens to be 4 of us here, and we got gender down in 4 people, but we didn't get the race mix down. We're a big diverse city and state, so I do not think this falls into, a race or necessarily economic breakout. I do just want to respond, though, to Henry's point that it would be insanity to elect delegates. Well, if you don't have a constitutional convention, guess what? Those of us who are in the legislature and the special interests who have been in control of all these things that New Yorkers are frustrated with will just keep doing what we've been doing. If you have an election of delegates, you end up with 204. Even if all the senators got in again, and they wouldn't, you still have a real opportunity for real people who are not part of the special interest controlled or owned process that is the New York State legislative and gubernatorial system to now have a chance at making it better. So I think it's driven by fear of the what if versus willingness to take the risk that we can get much better. Now, does that break down socioeconomically? I don't know, Brian. You need a sociologist.
I actually disagree. So I disagree with both. So I actually do think that this does break down. I know as unpopular as that might actually be for a soundbite for some people, I think it actually does break down. And so what you're seeing, I think, is real. Again, I want to emphasize, there have been attempts to weaken Article 17. The actual idea that there's a mandate for the care, to provide aid and care to the needy, I think that's real. And the fact of the matter is that our clients, people of color, low-income individuals, working class folks who actually are trying to make ends meet, people who are trying to hold on to their pensions, it's a real issue when we have what's going on in our government right now, is the idea that, when you even look at what happened in Wisconsin, there are real issues around right to work laws and everything else. To think that we could believe that people of color, that women, that immigrants are going to get a fair shake in this process, I just really think it is naive.
By the way,
So I would say that in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the breakdown, yes, my clients, all low-income New Yorkers, either involved in the criminal justice system, in the family court system as children and vulnerable teenagers, or through civil legal services, provision of services that we provide, yes, they are extremely at risk. And when we look at what happened at the election this year, we're still looking at what kind of moneyed interest actually had an influence on our election. Yes, I believe in our democracy. Yes, I believe in the diversity that we have strength here. But for us to think that we can go blindly without any other protections in place and that we're going to get diverse delegates that are going to come through and represent all those interests, I think it is a bit naive.
We have 1 minute left in this round. Gerald Benjamin, you'll get the last word in this round, if you want to respond to that.
What the legislature and their friends say is, watch out, we'll get elected and we'll do nothing. Don't do this. Why don't they want to do this? Why is the majority leader against it? Why is the speaker against it? Why is the minority leader in the Senate against it? They don't want it because they'll be bypassed, and if bypassed, likely to good things will happen. Pensions are protected by the U.S. Constitution. The argument's been overmade. Pensions can't be diminished. Current holders will not have their pensions diminished. This simple fact grounded in law. The arguments are being exaggerated to block a path to reforming New York government. The only available path to reforming New York government is being beaten down by the real money in this election, which is the union money. There's no right-wing money in this election. Look at the filings. It's a myth invented to scare you as you go in to vote.
Now, for the record, since it came up, Article 17 of the New York State Constitution is called social welfare. And I'll just read Section 1, which is short. The aid, care, and support of the needy are public concerns and shall be provided by the state and by such of its subdivisions and in such manner and by such means as the legislature may from time to time determine. So Article 17, social welfare, in the Constitution currently is in play here. And now we go to round 3, which is to get to hear brief closing statements from each debater. They will be 1 minute each. Remember, for the audience listening right now who voted before the debate, this is your last chance to decide how to vote in your post-debate vote, which we will get in before the end of the show, so we'll have instant results from the web. And debaters, this is your last chance for you to change their minds. And the order, as I have it, actually has us continuing with Gerald Benjamin. Right now, you get the first 1 minute closing statement.
Are you happy with a state government that interferes with New York governance and doesn't allow you to govern yourselves? Are you happy with a state legislature that has pandemic corruption with no ethics standard? Are you happy with a governor that's overpowerful and is trying to govern without representative democracy? Are you happy with an election system that keeps people from voting and is presumptively corrupt with a small c in its operation? If you're happy with all those things, then I say vote against the convention. If you're concerned about those things, I would urge you to join me in voting yes for a convention. It will be the only path in this generation to make serious reform in New York government. It will be the only path available to you in this generation to restore the greatness of our state, the greatness that I learned about when I had to memorize all the bridges and tunnels in the second grade in 1952 in Brooklyn.
And that didn't include the new Tappan Zee Bridge. So, against the motion, 1 minute closing statement from Adriene Holder, attorney in charge of civil practice of the Legal Aid Society.
I hope by now you all understand what we actually believe is at risk. And right now I hope that you will continue to think about the real facts of what it is that could easily happen, a complete rewriting of the Constitution and a gutting of so many of the protections that actually look out for low-income New Yorkers, the protections that assist low-wage workers as well as unionized workers through the public union system. We're talking about protections for immigrants, we're talking about protections for children and women and LGBT New Yorkers, and we stand to lose a lot. I also hope that you would be encouraged, though, that because of this debate and because of this discussion that we're having, that there are progressive values, values that we hold dear as New Yorkers, that we can build upon, and hopefully we will use that as an opportunity to try to vote out certain folks that we might think are preventing us from getting the things that we need for Albany to function. But I think it is naive and really to look at what has happened in this last election, that we still don't really understand all the forces that we're facing. It's naive for us to think. Please join us, other organizations that have been able to move for real change, experienced organizations, and vote no.
1 minute closing argument for the motion, Democratic State Senator Liz Krueger of Manhattan.
Thank you. I think if you did a laundry list of the kinds of legislation that we would all like to see changed, I bet all four of us would be almost identical in our views about what we would like to see changed. What we disagree on is how are we going to get there. There is concern on the con side that terrible things could happen and we could lose rights and protections. But in fact, the legislature, just like a convention, are susceptible to lobbying, but history suggests worst-case scenarios envisioned by opponents don't happen. Since 1846, there have been 5 constitutional conventions in New York, none of which has resulted in loss of major rights or protections. In fact, many of the aspects of our constitutional convention opponents fear we may lose were themselves added through constitutional conventions, not through the legislature. I believe we can make dramatic improvements in the process and the government of New York State through a constitutional convention. I hope you will, like me, trust in the voters of New York to make the right decisions and vote yes on November 7th.
And vote yes or no right now. Listeners who voted at the beginning of the hour, but wait one more minute for the last closing statement. I'm just getting people's voting fingers ready so people actually do it in the 2 minutes that we will allot for that. The final closing statement, 1 minute closing statement against the motion from Henry Garrido, Executive Director of the Union DC 37 representing municipal employees.
Well, make sure you vote no. I'm not afraid of constitutional convention. What I am not is easily fooled. And what I have seen many times were folks that will propose a change through a process just to do the opposite. And I believe this convention could be simply hijacked by very powerful right-wing forces, as our national election has in many instances throughout this country. I think the evidence is there. In the last convention in 1967, the mass majority of delegates were either already elected as officials or they were friends of those electeds who ran on slates. That could happen again. That will probably happen again here in New York. And there is simply just too much at risk. Not just in terms of retirement security for the people I represent, but also on the environment, on the Forever Wild provision, and everything else that we talked about in the civil liberties here. Vote no in a constitutional convention.
And that concludes our closing statements. Now it's time to learn which side won this debate. So listeners, viewers, Green Space audience members who participated, it's time to cast your second vote. If you voted at the beginning of the hour or before, go back to the website iq2us.org/vote, iq2us.org/vote, and vote on what you think now. Voting instructions are on the screens. Select 1 if you are for the motion, for the Constitutional Convention, 2 if you are against, 3 if you are undecided, iq2us.org/vote, iq2us.org/vote. Everyone else, hold your breaths. We'll bring you the results right after this.
This is Brooke Gladstone. You rely on WNYC for the facts, right? You value the facts. You must, because you're listening now. So why not become a sustaining member? We're always here for you, and an automatic monthly contribution of any amount means you're always there for us. The fact is, we can't do it without you. So call 888-376-WNYC or go to WNYC.org and click on Donate.
Support for WNYC comes from Purchase College SUNY, presenting Paul Beatty, author of The Sellout, in a public conversation as part of the Durst Distinguished Lecture Series, October 17th at 4:30 p.m. in the Humanities Theater. More at purchase.edu. The New York City Transitional Finance Authority, which is offering future tax-secured bonds to individual investors on Monday, October 16th and Tuesday, October 17th. The preliminary official circular and more information are available through financial advisors and broker-dealers. WNYC is a media partner of the Webby Awards, honoring internet excellence in websites, film and video, advertising, mobile, podcasts, new categories for games, and more. Early entry deadline October 27th. More info at webbyawards.com.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live in the green space. And now the results are in. The results are on a screen here in the green space, and I think I'm going to be handed a piece of paper in a matter of microseconds. Remember, it's the difference between the first and the second votes that determines our winner. And are we waiting for it? Are they still tabulating? Oh, okay. I'm told under a minute. So that's good because we have 3 minutes left in the show. So under a minute, the math still works. Barely. Can I follow up with the con side and ask if Professor Benjamin is right that there is not a lot of conservative money going into this, that the conservative movement in New York State, including the Conservative Party, is against the Constitutional Convention, and I've read that the money flowing in seems to be pro and con progressive groups, then why wouldn't they want this if it would be good for conservatives likely to take over?
Well, I don't believe that's the case.
You don't believe that?
I believe that there's been an influence of money on both sides, and I believe, just to be fair, and I believe it's just being easier masqueraded, because there's contributions into organizations that are in the pro side that will never make it in this scenario. What the professor may be referring to is this basically the funding to organizations who have come for or against, not those who are surrogates of those organizations and the influence of money in them.
All right, we'll do some follow-up reporting on that and put it out to the... Can I ask, again, while we're waiting for the result, maybe we can get a little narrative here, a show of hands. Who here in the green space voted at all at the beginning and at the end? Okay, so maybe about 20 people. How many of you changed your minds? About 4 or 5 people changed your minds, and that indicates something. So here we go. 33% agreed with the motion, 42% were against, 25% were undecided. Those were the first results. So the team arguing for the motion, let's see, the second vote was 39% for. I see. Okay, good. The pro team gained 6 points during the course of the hour. The against team pulled 4 points. They went up from 42 to 46. So a few of the undecideds went to each category. I call this pretty much a tie because if the pro side added 6 percentage points from the undecideds and the anti side added 4 percentage points from the undecideds, everybody did really well at this debate. Everybody gets a trophy for participating. We thank our partners at Intelligence Squared-U.S., and we hope we've provided a public service on this vital Election Day ballot question that so few people still even know about it. We'll continue to cover it on The Brian Lehrer Show. And thank you all for coming to the Green Space today and for listening and watching.